The Silver Crown by Robert C. O'Brien, Chapter 21, Elementary Destruction. It had been Ellen's intention to walk as far as the castle, determine where it was, and perhaps find out, if she could, whether Otto was there as she had suspected. She had not planned to enter it, nor even go very near it. Instead, she would continue the journey over the pass, find Aunt Sarah, and together they would figure out what to do about Otto. But the expression on his face, what had they done to him? He had been so lively and smart, his face quick to brighten and change, his eyes inquisitive and alert. Now he looked, Ellen recalled what he said, like dead people. That was how he looked. She could not bring herself to just walk away. Not quite yet, anyway. Undecided, she walked along the edge of the woods, skirting the fence in the direction the column of boys had gone. She wanted to look at Otto again. She followed them until they disappeared from sight around the front of the castle. Where were they going? She kept on, hoping to see until she had gone the length of the courtyard. Now she found herself still in the woods in front of the castle. From the front, however, she did not see into the grounds at all. Now she understood how the place was laid out. The great courtyard around the castle was precisely square. 3 sides of the square were guarded by the high fence with the barbed wire on top. The fourth, the front, had a wall of solid stone. It was just as high as the fence, and from where she stood it hid all but the highest of the castle's towers. The castle itself stood toward the front of the courtyard, closer to the wall than to the fences. She examined the wall. In the exact center, a couple of 100 yards from where she stood, there was a black iron gate. It was closed. A gravel driveway led from it and disappeared into the woods. She wondered briefly where it led, and then she stopped wondering because the gate itself suddenly cracked in the middle and swung open. 2 men, one to each half, were pushing it, and Ellen recognized their costumes. Both were in black with a green stripe on each leg. When the gate was fully opened, a car drove out. Ellen was startled. It had not occurred to her that there could be so modern, so ordinary a thing as a car connected with this sinister dark castle. Actually, it was not an ordinary car. It was a big lumbering vehicle, half bus, half truck, with double wheels on the back and rough tires. It rumbled out of the courtyard and stopped. One of the men who had pushed the gate climbed in beside the driver, and they roared off down the gravel road into the woods. The other man went back inside and pulled the gate shut behind him, one half at a time. Now Ellen was more curious than ever as to where the driveway went. She listened for the noise of the engine, but it quickly died away, muffled by the thickness of the forest. There was no one in sight, and no sound from inside. Half an hour passed. She worked her way along the edge of the woods until she was directly opposite the gate. From here she could see that the 2 halves did not quite meet in the middle. There was a visible crack between them. She wanted to look through this crack. To do this, she would have to leave the shelter of the woods and walk out in the open. The gate was about 200 feet from where she stood. Should she risk it? Would she be seen? Was there a lookout somewhere along the wall? She examined it carefully. There was nothing that looked like a peephole nor anything resembling a sentry box along the top. She darted out of the woods, and a moment later she was peering through the crack with one eye. Inside she could see part, but not all, of the front of the castle. The gravel drive on which she stood led to a massive front door framed by dark pillars, but once inside the wall, the driveway was no longer gray gravel. It turned black, the same shiny black as the paths she had seen earlier. About halfway up the largest of the castle towers, on the front side, she saw a large, multifaceted bay window. It was the only real glass window in the castle. The others, where there were any, were merely dark slits. She stared at this window and thought she could see someone moving behind it, looking out, but she could not be sure. Then something else caught her eye. In front of the gate, directly under the bay window, but partly out of her field of vision, stood a strange square enclosure, very like a large playpen. Its sides were of open fence work, waist high. Its floor, what she could see of it through the crack, looked as if it were made of heavy black, close-knit wire screen. There was a man pacing in this playpen thing, disappearing from her view and then reappearing. He held his head in his hands as if it were aching. She did not hear the car coming until it was nearly upon her, but someone inside had been listening or knew somehow, for she saw a black-clad figure run to the gate, run to within 6 inches of her intent eye, and as the rumbling engine came out of the woods, the gate swung heavily open. She had no place to hide. She was trapped. Not quite. The right half of the gate opened first. She jumped aside. Then, as the left half swung toward her, she moved with it. By the time it opened all the way, she was behind it, between it and the wall. Not much of a hiding place, but it gave her a minute, and she could see out between the hinges. She scrunched herself as small as she could and waited. The car was the same one she had seen before, but it had picked up some passengers. It stopped just inside the gate, almost in front of her nose. The back opened and 6 children got out. 5 boys first, and then, lagging, a girl about a year older than Ellen. They were not dressed in black, but in ragged clothing. 2 men in black uniforms watched the children as they climbed out of the bus. Each child, as he stepped down onto the black path, stood stock still and faced the castle as if awaiting orders. The 2 men observed this. Then they walked together to the back of the bus to close its heavy door. At this moment, while all backs were turned, Ellen made up her mind. She dashed through the open gate and stood with the other children. A moment later, they were all marching toward the castle door, and the iron gate clanged shut behind them. Neither of the 2 men noticed that there were now 7 children instead of 6, and none of the children said a word. The front door opened as they approached it, and they walked through in silence. The 2 men dropped back as the door closed. Inside, they stood in a circular antechamber, low ceiling, black floor, dimly lit with weak, flickery electric light bulbs. It was not at all like the arched gay gold and stained glass entrance hall Ellen had once dreamed in her own castle. But she did not have much time for comparisons. 6 long corridors led off like the arms of a starfish from the room they stood in, and without a second's hesitation, the children walked off down one of them. How did they know where they were supposed to go? Had they been here before? Ellen did not think so. They moved almost as if they were getting silent orders from somewhere. If so, Ellen was not getting them. She followed the others down the hall. Now that she was inside, she wondered why she had done it. It was to rescue Otto, of course, she told herself. But she had not even the slightest idea where to find Otto in this vast, dark building, and if she did find him, she did not believe for a minute that they would let her just take him and walk out. And who were they, anyway? And what was the whole place for? Why were all these children here, and what did they do? And she realized that it was curiosity, almost as much as wanting to help Otto, that had made up her mind so suddenly. It had probably been a foolish thing to do, but it was done. She was inside, for the moment, at least. Her best plan was to stay with the other children. Obviously, they were supposed to be here. And she was not. If she did what they did, perhaps she would not be noticed. She would play for time and learn what she could learn. As they walked down the corridor, they passed doors, all closed. At first, she thought the castle was filled with nothing but mysterious, absolute, overwhelming silence. But now, from behind some of these doors, she heard noises. From one of them, a busy hammering. From another, voices, children's voices, chanting in unison. It sounded like school. Her small group stopped at one of the doors and went in. It was the quartermaster's depot. Behind a table sat a young man in black, but no green stripes, and behind him stood shelves of clothing. The children fell in line, and Ellen sprang in the rear. She wished they did not know quite so quickly what to do. Even more, she wished that somebody would say something, even just, "Hey, you!" There was a portion of the wall marked with feet and inches, upward and sideward. The first boy stood in front of it, snapped erect, marched to the quartermaster, and received a small stack of clothes. The second followed. The feet and inches told the size. The young man had only to glance and reach behind him. It was Ellen's turn. She stood erect in front of the wall as the others had done, braced for sudden and disastrous discovery, ready to run. The young man was going to say, "There are only supposed to be 6 of you. Who are you? There are only supposed to be 6. Who are you?" But he did not. And in a moment, she too had a uniform. There were closets the size of phone booths to change in. She changed in frantic haste so she would be ready when the others were. The black uniform was rather scratchy but fit well enough. There was no difference between the boys' and girls' suits. Black slacks with an elastic waist and a black pullover shirt. What should she do with her own clothes, with her rucksack? Leave them in the closet? But she took out her handbag, slipped it on her wrist. Could she keep it? Did anybody here carry a handbag? No. She found a pocket of her uniform, slipped her $1.21 and her letter into it, and tucked the handbag into the rucksack. She was ready. So were the other 6, all in black uniforms like her own, back into the hall, again without a word, and through another door, a dining room, a somber room as big as a theater, and almost as dim, with endless rows of long wooden tables and benches all empty now. Obviously it was past the regular eating hour, but they were to be fed anyway. There was soup, bread, cheese, milk, canned. There were knives, spoons, trays, and bowls along a cafeteria counter. Again, it reminded Ellen of a school, only dingier, but she was grateful for the food. They served themselves, and since no one seemed to notice, she heaped her tray with bread and filled her glass and soup bowl level full. It was tasteless food. Ellen wolfed it down as if she were starving. As, in fact, she nearly was. After lunch, the trouble began. When they had stood up from eating and dumped their trays into a tub of grimy dishwater, the children went back into the hall. But this time they separated and headed in different directions. 3 of the boys vanished abruptly through a door. 2 others walked one way down the hall. The girl walked the other way. Ellen, in a panic of indecision, looked one way, then the other, as they left her. Then she ran and caught up with the girl. Perhaps the girls were supposed to stay together. The girl went the whole length of a corridor, turned left into another, and stopped in front of a door. She seemed unaware that Ellen was following her. She opened the door, and they went in. It was a classroom they had entered. It looked like a lot of other classrooms Ellen had been in before, only it had no windows. Still, it was more brightly lit than the dark corridors of the dining room, and for a wonder, people were talking. The girl went directly to an empty desk and sat down. Ellen sat in an empty desk behind her. About a third of the desks, there were some 30 in all, were empty. In the front of the room, facing the children, stood the teacher, a man dressed in black with the familiar green stripes. These must be, Ellen decided, a sign of rank or authority. In the front row, a boy was reading aloud from a book. All the others were listening to him and following in their own books, so was the teacher. There was a book on the desk in front of Ellen. It had a cardboard cover on which was printed the title, Elementary Destruction, 2nd Grade Readings in Destructive Behavior. What a strange title for a lesson book. Then Ellen saw something stranger still. In the lower right-hand corner of the cover there was a picture. An imprinture of a crown, exactly the same shape as her crown, but jet black. Under the crown, in small print, was the word Hieronymus. The name rang in Ellen's mind like a minor chord. She saw that the girl ahead of her had opened her book to page 13, and also the boy who had been reading had stopped. The class looked at the teacher. He turned the page in his book, pointed to another boy, and said, "You! 72-9B. Read page 14. 72-9B, a thin boy with yellow hair. Ellen could see only the back of his head, began to read. End of chapter 21.